The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the studio windows as Olivia stood before her easel, brush suspended in midair. Something felt off. Her eyes darted around the familiar space, scanning the white walls adorned with her collection of paintings accumulated over years of passionate work. Then it hit her, the empty space where her masterpiece should have been. The Breaking Dawn had been her breakthrough piece, created during those first euphoric months of marriage to Luke. The painting captured a moment of pure inspiration, a woman emerging from darkness into golden light, her face a complex tapestry of hope and uncertainty. Art critics had praised its raw emotional depth, but for Olivia, it represented something far more personal, the moment she truly found her voice as an artist. She set down her brush and walked to the blank wall, her fingers tracing the faint outline where the frame had hung. The other paintings seemed to shrink away from the void, as if acknowledging the absence of their crowning companion. A knot formed in her stomach as she tried to remember the last time she'd specifically looked at it. 3 days ago. A week? The sound of keys jangling at the front door broke her reverie. Luke was home early for once, after weeks of late nights at his investment firm. She heard him shuffling in the entryway, taking longer than usual to remove his coat and shoes. When he finally appeared in the doorway of her studio, his typically confident posture was replaced by something more guarded. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar strain. His eyes flickered to the empty wall, then quickly away. "How was your day?" Olivia studied her husband's face, the dark circles under his eyes, the slight stubble on his usually clean-shaven jaw, the way his tie hung loosely around his neck like a noose. "Luke," she said carefully, "where is my painting?" He flinched almost imperceptibly, but she caught it. After 12 years of marriage, she could read his micro-expressions like a familiar book. "Which one?" he asked, though they both knew exactly which painting she meant. "Don't." Olivia's voice hardened. "Don't pretend you don't know. The Breaking Dawn is missing. It's my most important work, and it's gone." "What happened to it?" Luke's shoulders sagged as he leaned against the doorframe. "I needed to have it professionally cleaned," he said, the words coming out too quickly. "You mentioned some concern about the varnish yellowing, remember? I thought I'd surprise you." The lie hung between them like poison gas. Olivia had never mentioned any concerns about the varnish. The painting had been perfectly preserved, protected from direct sunlight and maintained with religious care. "Which gallery did you take it to?" she pressed, giving him one last chance to come clean. "Armstrong's, downtown," he replied, but his left eye twitched, his tell when he was lying, the same tick she'd first noticed during poker nights with friends years ago. Olivia pulled out her phone and started dialing. Luke's face paled. "What are you doing?" "Calling Armstrong's. They're open for another hour." She held his gaze as the phone rang. "If my painting's there, I'd like to check on its progress." Luke's hand shot out, reaching for her phone, but stopped midway as he realized how suspicious the gesture would appear. "Olivia, wait dash." The gallery assistant's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "Armstrong's Fine Art Gallery, how may I help you?" "Yes, hello. This is Olivia Chen. I'm calling about my painting that was brought in for cleaning, The Breaking Dawn." A pause, followed by keyboard clicks. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but we don't have any paintings under that name in our system. When was it brought in?" Olivia ended the call, her hand trembling slightly as she lowered the phone. The studio suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "You want to try again, Luke? This time with the truth?" He ran his fingers through his silver-streaked hair, a gesture that had once made her heart flutter but now only heightened her sense of betrayal. "It's complicated," he began, then stopped as Olivia's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She walked to her desk, aware of Luke's growing tension. The email was from her friend Claire, an art curator in New York. The subject line read, "Is this yours?" Listed on Morton's auction house. Olivia clicked the link with numb fingers. There it was, the breaking dawn, photographed under professional lights, its colors as vibrant as the day she'd finished it. The starting bid made her breath catch, $75,000. The auction was scheduled for tomorrow morning. She turned to Luke, who had gone completely still. "How long?" she whispered. "How long were you planning to hide this from me? Were you hoping I wouldn't notice until after it was sold to some stranger?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with years of trust crumbling away. When Luke finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I can explain everything." But Olivia wasn't sure she wanted to hear his explanation. Not yet. Not when the wound was so fresh, when the betrayal burned so hot in her chest. She grabbed her car keys from the desk. "I'm going to Claire's," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. "Don't call me. Don't text me. When I come back, you better be ready to tell me exactly what's going on." "And Luke?" She paused at the door, looking back at the man she thought she knew. "If you try to sell that painting before I return, I swear to God, you'll regret it." As she drove through the darkening streets of their small town, tears finally began to fall. But beneath the hurt, another emotion was taking root, a cold, calculating anger that demanded answers. And she would get them, no matter the cost. Claire's modern downtown loft was exactly what Olivia needed, a space as far removed from her own life as possible. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, making her small-town troubles feel somehow more manageable from this elevation. "He sold it without even telling you?" Claire paced the polished concrete floor, wine glass in hand. Her heels clicked with each step, a sharp counterpoint to the soft jazz playing in the background. "That painting was your breakthrough piece. It's practically your signature work." Olivia sat on the leather sofa, her own wine untouched. The auction house website glowed from her laptop screen, mocking her with images of her own creation. "I keep thinking there must be some mistake. Luke knows what that painting means to me. We built our life together while I was working on it." Claire stopped pacing and leaned against her desk, her dark eyes narrowing. "Have you checked your joint accounts? If he's selling your work behind your back, who knows what else he's been hiding?" The suggestion hit Olivia like a physical blow. In 12 years of marriage, she'd never once questioned their financial arrangements. Luke handled the investments while she managed her art career and their household expenses. It had seemed like a natural division of labor, but now. Her hands shook as she pulled up their online banking. The password failed on the first try. And the second. "He changed the password," she whispered, the implications settling like lead in her stomach. "Try his office computer," Claire suggested, refilling her wine glass. "You said he's been working late, maybe there's something on there that could explain all this." Olivia's mind flashed to Luke's home office, with its meticulously organized desk and the computer he always kept locked. "I wouldn't even know where to start. He's careful about security." A slow smile spread across Claire's face. "Lucky for you, my ex was in cybersecurity. Taught me a few tricks before he proved himself unworthy of trust." She set down her wine and moved to her desk, pulling out a small USB drive. "This little beauty can bypass most standard password protections. Just plug it in, let it run, and you'll have access to everything." Olivia stared at the device, moral implications warring with her need for answers. "I don't know, Claire. Breaking into his computer seems..." "Seems what? Wrong? Like selling your masterpiece without permission?" Claire pressed the drive into Olivia's hand. "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." Before Olivia could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Luke: "Please come home. We need to talk. I'll tell you everything." Claire read the message over her shoulder and scoffed. Men always want to talk when they're caught. But do they ever tell the whole truth? Another text followed: "I know you're angry, but this isn't what you think. There are things you don't understand. Keep the drive, Claire said, closing Olivia's fingers around it. Even if you don't use it, having options never hurts. Olivia slipped the drive into her purse, its weight negligible yet somehow profound. I should go home. Confront him directly. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. There's never a reasonable explanation for betrayal, Claire said, but she helped Olivia gather her things. At the door, she caught Olivia's arm. Whatever he tells you, remember, he only started explaining after he got caught. And the auction's tomorrow morning. Don't let him run out the clock. The drive home felt surreal, streetlights blurring into streams of gold against the darkness. Olivia's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Had Luke's investment firm failed? Was he gambling? Having an affair? The Luke she knew would never, but then, the Luke she knew would never sell her painting either. She pulled into their driveway, noting Luke's car was still there. The house lights were on, warm and inviting, a facade of normalcy that now felt like a lie. As she reached for her purse, her fingers brushed against the USB drive. The front door opened, and Luke stepped onto the porch. He'd changed into casual clothes, his corporate armor stripped away. "Thank God you're back," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I need to show you something. It'll explain everything." Olivia got out of the car, keeping her distance. "The truth this time." "The whole truth," he promised, holding up what looked like financial documents. "But Olivia, you need to understand, I did what I did to protect us." "Protect us from what?" Luke glanced over his shoulder, an uncharacteristically paranoid gesture. "Not out here. Inside. There are people who might be watching." The hairs on the back of Olivia's neck stood up. She thought of the USB drive in her purse, Claire's warnings, the changed passwords. Whatever truth Luke was about to reveal, she had a feeling it was only the tip of the iceberg. She followed him inside, where more documents were spread across their dining room table. At the center lay a single photograph, a group of men in expensive suits, Luke among them, all smiling at some corporate event. Luke picked up the photo, his hands trembling slightly. "It started with these men," he said quietly. "I trusted them. And that trust is about to cost us everything." Olivia sat at the dining room table, staring at the documents spread before her. Bank statements, investment reports, and emails painted a picture that grew more disturbing with each page she turned. Luke stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the night sky, as if he couldn't bear to face the evidence of his own downfall. $7 million, she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How did you lose $7 million of other people's money?" Luke pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "I didn't lose it. I was set up. We all were." He turned back to the table and pointed to the photograph. "See the man on the right? That's Marcus Davidson, head of Davidson Financial. 6 months ago, he approached me with what seemed like a brilliant investment opportunity, a chance to get in on the ground floor of a new tech startup. And you believed him. Everyone believed him. His reputation was spotless. The company had patents, prototypes, everything checked out." Luke picked up one of the documents. "What we didn't know was that it was all fabricated. The patents were forgeries, the prototypes were mock-ups, and the company was a shell." Olivia's mind raced. But surely there were regulations, oversight. Davidson had people inside the regulatory bodies. He'd spent years placing them there, building his network. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the money was gone. Laundered through a dozen offshore accounts. The scope of it made Olivia's head spin. "And your clients?" Luke's face crumpled. "I convinced them to invest. People I've known for years. Friends. They trusted me with their retirement funds, their children's college savings." He grabbed another document, hands shaking. "Last week, Davidson disappeared. The FBI is investigating, but the money's gone. And as the investment advisor who recommended the fund. You're liable, Olivia finished. The weight of it settled over her like a shroud. That's why you sold my painting. I had to do something. Luke's voice cracked. The lawsuits are coming. When they hit, we'll lose everything, the house, the cars, my license. I thought if I could at least secure some cash reserves. Olivia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. So you decided to steal from me instead? I was going to replace it. I found a buyer willing to pay 3 times the auction price, off the books. Enough to start over somewhere else if things went bad. The casual way he discussed selling her work made Olivia's blood boil. You had no right. A sharp knock at the front door cut her off. They both froze, staring at each other in the dim light. It was nearly midnight. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Luke moved to the window, carefully peering through the curtains. All the color drained from his face. It's them, he whispered. Davidson's people. They've been following me, making sure nobody talks to the FBI. He grabbed Olivia's arm. We need to leave. Now. Through the back. What? No, I'm not running anywhere until . The sound of breaking glass from their kitchen window made them both jump. Luke pulled her toward the hallway just as heavy footsteps entered their home. Mrs. Chen. A man's voice, smooth and professional. We apologize for the late hour, but we need to have a conversation about your husband's business dealings. Olivia felt Luke's grip tighten on her arm. In the darkness of the hallway, she could barely make out his face, but his terror was palpable. Please don't make this difficult, the voice continued, closer now. We're simply here to ensure everyone's cooperation in this unfortunate situation. Luke was tugging her toward the garage door, but Olivia's mind was racing. The USB drive from Claire sat unused in her purse, which she'd left by the front door. If Luke's computer held evidence of Davidson's scheme. The paintings, she whispered to Luke. My studio. There's a loose floorboard where I keep my important documents. He nodded, understanding. They could hear the intruders methodically searching the house, getting closer. Olivia made a decision. You get what you need from the studio. I'll create a distraction. No, Luke hissed. These people are dangerous. They're not going to hurt me, she said with more confidence than she felt. I'm the innocent wife, remember? The one whose painting is conveniently up for auction tomorrow. The one who might have access to accounts and documents her husband never mentioned. Before Luke could stop her, Olivia stepped into the hallway. Gentlemen, she called out. I believe we need to discuss how my artwork fits into all this. She heard the footsteps pause, then change direction toward her voice. In the darkness behind her, she sensed rather than saw Luke slip away toward her studio. Everything now depended on her ability to play her part convincingly, the betrayed wife, eager to save herself by cooperating. But as she walked toward the living room with her hands raised, Olivia's mind was already racing ahead. The painting, the auction, Luke's computer, Claire's USB drive, pieces of a puzzle that might offer salvation or destruction. She just had to figure out how they fit together before it was too late. The living room lights flicked on, momentarily blinding Olivia. As her eyes adjusted, she found herself facing 3 men in expensive suits. Their polished appearance contrasted sharply with the violence of their entry, making them somehow more terrifying. The one in front, tall, silver-haired, with wire-rimmed glasses, smiled as if they were meeting at a cocktail party. Mrs. Chen, thank you for being reasonable. I'm Richard Knox, Mr. Davidson's head of security. You broke into my house, Olivia said, letting genuine anger color her voice. I could call the police. But you won't, Knox replied smoothly. Because deep down, you know your husband's actions have put you in an impossible position. We're here to help you find a way out. The other two men began systematically searching the room, their movements precise and practiced. One picked up her purse from near the door, emptying its contents onto the coffee table. The USB drive from Claire clattered against the wood. Knox's eyes flickered to it. Interesting. Planning to do some digital exploration, Mrs. Chen. My friend gave it to me, Olivia said quickly. I don't even know what's on it. A shame we'll never find out. Knox pocketed the drive. Now, about that painting of yours. The Breaking Dawn, I believe. Scheduled for auction tomorrow morning. Olivia's mind raced. They knew about the auction, which meant they'd been watching longer than she'd realized. What about it? Its sale would generate considerable liquid assets at a very convenient time. Assets that rightfully belong to your husband's investors. Knox settled into an armchair like he owned it. We can't allow that. From somewhere in the back of the house came the sound of breaking glass, followed by a muffled curse. Knox nodded to one of his men, who drew a gun and moved silently toward the noise. Olivia's heart hammered. Luke was still in her studio. She had to keep them talking. The painting is mine, she said firmly. Created years before any of this happened. You have no claim to it. Perhaps. But according to our sources, you and your husband share ownership of all marital assets. And given the circumstances. Knox spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. Well, let's just say the courts would take a very dim view of any attempt to hide or transfer assets right now. What do you want? Cooperation. First, you'll cancel the auction. Then, you'll sign over the painting to Davidson Financial as a show of good faith. In return, we might be persuaded to help minimize the legal consequences for your husband. A crash from the direction of her studio made Olivia jump. Shouts followed, then the sound of a scuffle. Knox sighed. It seems Mr. Chen is being less cooperative than his wife. Smith, check on Torres. The second man moved toward the hallway, leaving Olivia alone with Knox. Her mind raced through options. Luke must have found something in the studio, something important enough to risk confrontation. She needed to buy him more time. The painting's documentation, she said quickly. It's all in a safety deposit box downtown. Even if I agreed, we couldn't complete the transfer without it. Knox studied her face. You're lying. Check for yourself. The bank opens at 9. We can go together, verify everything. More sounds of struggle reached them. A gunshot cracked through the house, deafening in the enclosed space. Olivia started forward, but Knox's hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. Mrs. Chen, he said softly, I want you to understand something. This situation has a very limited number of acceptable outcomes. Your husband's reckless actions have forced our hand. Now dash. He never finished the sentence. The lights went out, plunging the house into darkness. In the same instant, a familiar voice shouted from the front yard. FBI. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Knox's grip tightened painfully. You couldn't possibly have dash. Wrong, Olivia spat. I triggered the silent alarm when I first came home. Been broadcasting everything since you broke in. She twisted free of his grasp. Check your pocket. That USB drive? It's a police tracker. Flashlight beams cut through the windows as FBI agents surrounded the house. Knox lunged for Olivia, but she was already moving, diving behind the sofa as chaos erupted. The front door burst open. Someone tackled Knox. Commands and threats filled the air. Olivia crawled toward the hallway, desperate to reach Luke. She found him in the studio doorway, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead but very much alive. Clutched in his hand was an external hard drive. Evidence, he gasped. Everything Davidson did, everyone he paid off. I kept backups. Couldn't tell you, had to keep you safe. Olivia helped him to his feet as FBI agents secured the house. Through the window, she could see Knox and his men being led away in handcuffs. Her painting was safe, at least for now, but the night's revelations had changed everything. As paramedics checked Luke's injury, Olivia's phone buzzed. A text from Claire: "Just saw the police cars. You okay? By the way, that USB drive I gave you? It was just an empty stick. But I figured it might come in handy as a bluff." Olivia looked at Luke, remembering his desperation to protect her, his willingness to sacrifice everything they had. The truth had come at a steep price, but at least now they could face whatever came next together. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the auction house. Subject line: "Urgent, regarding lot number 247, the breaking dawn." She opened it with trembling fingers, and her blood ran cold. The message was only 3 words long. Sold in advance. The FBI field office buzzed with activity even at 3 in the morning. Olivia sat in a cramped interview room, a cup of cold coffee untouched before her, as Agent Sarah Martinez reviewed her statement for the 3rd time. "So the painting was sold before the auction even began," Martinez said, frowning at her notes. "And you believe this connects to Davidson's operation?" "It has to," Olivia replied, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "The timing's too perfect. They knew we'd be distracted by Knox's visit while the sale went through." In the adjacent room, visible through a glass partition, Luke sat with 2 other agents, the hard drive from his office connected to their computers. His head wound had been cleaned and bandaged, but he looked pale under the fluorescent lights. "The good news," Martinez said, closing her notebook, "is that the evidence your husband preserved appears legitimate. Names, dates, transaction records, everything we need to unravel Davidson's network." She leaned forward. "The bad news is that this makes both of you primary witnesses in a federal investigation. And some very powerful people are about to become very uncomfortable." "What about my painting?" "Technically, it was a legal sale. Your husband had joint ownership rights." Martinez's expression softened slightly. "I know it's not what you want to hear, but recovering it might not be possible through official channels." Olivia's phone vibrated, another message from Claire: "Meet me at the gallery. Found something you need to see." "I need to go," Olivia said, standing. "Unless you're charging me with something." Martinez shook her head. "You're free to leave." "But Mrs. Chen." She held out a card. "If anyone approaches you about dropping your witness statement, call me immediately. These people rarely give up easily." In the hallway, Luke intercepted her. "Olivia, wait. Please." He looked wrecked, his usual confidence shattered. "I know I messed up. But everything I did to protect us." "Did you?" Olivia's voice was quiet but sharp. "Or did you do it to protect yourself? Your reputation? Your pride? That's not fair. Fair." She laughed, a harsh sound. "You want to talk about fair? You sold my soul to save your skin, Luke. That painting wasn't just art, it was every dream, every struggle, every moment of doubt I overcame to become who I am. And you traded it away without a second thought." "I'll make it right," he promised. "Somehow, I'll dash." "No." Olivia stepped back. "I'll make it right. But first, I need to know who I'm really married to, the man who supported my dreams, or the one who sold them out." She left him standing there, his reflection fragmenting in the glass walls of the FBI office. Outside, the pre-dawn air was sharp and clean. Her phone buzzed again with an address from Claire, followed by cryptic instructions: "Come alone. Bring proof of ownership. Trust me." The drive to the gallery district took 20 minutes. The streets were empty, most buildings dark except for security lights. Claire waited in front of a converted warehouse, her gallery's sign dark above her head. "You're not going to believe this," Claire said by way of greeting. She looked charged with nervous energy. "Remember Thomas Bennett? The collector from Chicago?" Olivia frowned. "What about him?" "He's the one who bought your painting. But here's the thing, he didn't know it was yours. The sale was handled through a shell company, one of Davidson's fronts. They presented it as an anonymous work to avoid attention." "How do you know all this?" Claire's eyes gleamed. "Because Bennett's my biggest client. And when I told him the real story, let's just say he was very interested in making things right." She led Olivia into the gallery, past darkened displays to a back office. A man in an expensive suit waited there, examining a painting under gallery lights. "Mr. Bennett," Claire announced, "meet Olivia Chen." Bennett turned, and Olivia recognized him from art magazines, silver-haired, distinguished, with a reputation for both wealth and integrity in the art world. "Mrs. Chen," he said warmly, "I believe we need to discuss the proper attribution of a certain painting." "You have it?" Olivia's heart raced. "Here." "Not yet. But I've arranged a private viewing tomorrow morning. The real buyer deserves to know the work's true provenance, don't you think?" He smiled, but there was steel behind it. "Especially given the current legal complications surrounding its sale." Olivia understood the implication. With her testimony and Luke's evidence threatening Davidson's empire, the painting's ownership could become a bargaining chip. But wielded by the right hands. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. Bennett's smile widened. "Let's discuss strategy, shall we? After all, in my experience, the art world responds best to a certain type of pressure, the kind that comes from knowing exactly which strings to pull." As they talked, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would require cunning, timing, and perhaps a bit of artistic license with the truth. But for Olivia, it wasn't just about recovering her painting anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice, her power, and maybe, if she was lucky, discovering whether anything remained of the love that had inspired the Breaking Dawn in the first place. Her phone lit up with a text from Luke, "Whatever you're planning, let me help. I owe you that much." She stared at the message for a long moment before typing her reply, "Be ready. Tomorrow changes everything." The private viewing room at Morton's auction house gleamed with polished wood and brass fixtures. Olivia stood before the Breaking Dawn, her heart pounding as she faced her creation for the first time since its disappearance. The woman in the painting seemed to watch her, understanding in her half-shadowed eyes. "Beautiful work," said the man beside her, not Bennett, but someone altogether more dangerous. James Davidson himself, emerged from hiding for what he believed was a crucial business meeting. Such raw emotion. One might almost call it valuable. "Worth more than $7 million?" Olivia asked quietly. "That's what you stole from Luke's clients, isn't it?" Davidson's smile never wavered. "Alleged theft, Mrs. Chen. Nothing's been proven. Though your husband's recent cooperation with the FBI has caused some inconvenience. That's why you're here. To negotiate." "Smart woman." He gestured to the painting. "Your testimony, combined with Luke's evidence, could be problematic. But perhaps we could arrange a trade, the painting's permanent transfer to your possession in exchange for a slight revision of your statement to the authorities." Olivia studied the canvas, remembering the months she'd spent creating it. Each brushstroke held a memory, Luke bringing her coffee during late-night sessions, his encouragement when she doubted herself, his pride when she finally finished. And Luke's testimony? "He'll see reason. Men like your husband understand the value of discretion." Davidson checked his watch. "I have a car waiting. We can handle the paperwork now, if you're ready to be sensible." The door opened behind them. "I believe Mrs. Chen has other plans," Thomas Bennett said, entering with Claire and two men in suits, not FBI agents, but lawyers from the state's most prestigious firm. Davidson's smile tightened. "This is a private meeting. Not anymore. Bennett handed Davidson a thick folder. These documents prove the painting's sale was fraudulent, processed through shell companies linked directly to your organization. The kind of paper trail that makes prosecutors very happy. You can't prove dash. We already have, Claire interrupted, holding up her phone. Everything you just said was recorded. Combined with the evidence Luke preserved and Olivia's testimony. She shrugged. Well, let's just say, inconvenience might be an understatement. Davidson's mask cracked. You set me up. No, Olivia said softly. You did that yourself. Every time you chose greed over honesty. Every life you ruined. Every trust you betrayed. She turned to the lawyers. I believe the FBI will be very interested in this meeting. The door opened again. This time it was Agent Martinez, followed by her team. Mr. Davidson, she said, clearly enjoying the moment. We've been looking for you. As Davidson was led away in handcuffs, Luke appeared in the doorway. He looked uncertain, hesitating before approaching Olivia. I got your message. About being ready. Olivia nodded to Bennett, who stepped forward with another document. The painting's legal ownership is being transferred solely to Mrs. Chen, he explained. Part of a settlement agreement that should help recover some of your client's losses. Luke stared at the painting, then at Olivia. You could have taken everything. After what I did, no one would blame you. I almost did, she admitted. But then I realized something. This painting, it's about emergence, about stepping into the light even when you're afraid. When I painted it, I was discovering my voice as an artist. Now. She took a deep breath. Now maybe it's about second chances. I don't deserve one. Probably not. Olivia smiled slightly. But that's the thing about art, it shows us possibilities we might not see otherwise. The question is, what will you do with that possibility? Luke met her gaze, and for the first time since this began, she saw real understanding in his eyes. Whatever it takes, he said quietly. To rebuild. To earn back your trust. Even if it takes years. Claire cleared her throat. The gallery's hosting a special exhibition next month. Featuring works about transformation and redemption. If you're interested, Olivia. I think, Olivia said, still looking at Luke, I might have something to say about that. Later, as they prepared to transport The Breaking Dawn to its temporary home in Bennett's gallery, Olivia stood alone with her creation. The woman in the painting seemed different now, stronger, wiser, but still reaching toward the light. On the back of the canvas, barely visible, were the words she'd written years ago, for Luke, who helped me find my way. She took out a pen and added a new line, and for myself, who learned to light the way back. 6 months later, Olivia unveiled her new series at Claire's gallery. 7 paintings, each exploring themes of betrayal, forgiveness, and growth. At the center hung The Breaking Dawn, flanked by its spiritual successor, The Long Night's Journey. In the new piece, 2 figures emerged from darkness, supporting each other, their faces turned toward a distant but unwavering light. Luke stood at the back of the crowd during the opening, wearing a visitor's badge from the halfway house where he was serving his reduced sentence. Their eyes met across the room, and Olivia saw in his face what she'd captured in her art, the cost of mistakes, the price of redemption, and the enduring power of choosing light over darkness, day after day. Some of the guests whispered about scandal and betrayal, but Olivia knew the real story wasn't in the headlines or court documents. It lived in layers of paint and shadow, in the spaces between what was lost and what could still be found, in the endless human capacity for both destruction and renewal. As the evening wound down, she found Luke studying The Long Night's Journey. You made me look stronger than I am, he said softly. Olivia took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the years of shared history. No, she replied. I painted you as you could be. The rest is up to you. Together, They stood in the gallery's gentle light, surrounded by images of their past and possibilities of their future, knowing that some dawns take longer to break than others, but are no less beautiful for the waiting.